Okay, that's enough silliness. Hello, team. Hello. How are you all doing? Hey, Daryl, Samuel, nice to have you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for joining right for the very beginning. This is going to be an exciting one today. Hello, 7924A. Oh, I can see there's some comments from before as well, which I didn't spot, sorry. I say it's going to be exciting. I think it's exciting. I hope you think it's exciting as well. Yeah, Samuel's excited. Yes, Samuel, get in there. Right. So I'm going to give everybody, I say everybody, I'm going to give people a few more minutes. We can chat. Tell me what's been going on for you this week. What have you been excited about? You're excited. What are you excited about? Maybe it's not what I'm excited about. Tell me more. There's been loads of stuff happening this week. All good things. What does everybody think about the Apple news? Was it yesterday? And all the days are blurring into one. Yeah, SQLite. Interesting. Excited about SQLite? Is that Amphioctopus? Who is that? I don't believe that that's your real name. Anyway, you don't have to give away your identity here at all. So thanks for joining. Stick around, stick for the chat and more. Yeah, what else? Yes, native PHP. That's what we're here for. Thanks, Samuel. I'm glad one person is as excited about that as I am. So thanks for joining and being excited with me. That's great. What else can I don't know how to fill the time. We'll wait like another minute or so, and then we'll get down to business. New MacBook Pro. Woo! So what are you on at the moment, Daryl? And is it a brand new one that you're getting? Are you going to be, what's the M3? Are you going to be an M3er? Hi, Wally. Another person excited for native PHP. 7924A. I assume you're some kind of robot. Hello, I am 7924A. Cool name for a robot. M3 Pro. Ooh, sexy. Cool, okay. Well, it's been that extra minute. I am here to let you win my heart with serverless. Okay, so the chat thing is always hidden behind this little heart bubble and I can never read it. I hope we're going to do that. I hope we're going to do that today. Win some hearts. But we'll see. I think this is quite a divisive whole native PHP thing is quite a divisive thing. Cool, there's quite a few native PHP people here today. That's good. Thanks very much. Spread the word. Let's try and get a few more people on here. I've done what I can, I think, but let's get everybody who's excited about native PHP to come and join in today. So first things first. Let's get down to some real business. First things first is I posted an announcement that we worked on this week, myself, to the native PHP community. It's on GitHub, in the discussions area of native PHP /Laravel. We can have a look at that. I'll probably get it up on my screen in a second, but have a read of that if you've got a moment whilst I'm talking, because we're going to talk about that. I haven't seen actually if there are any questions, but we'll have a look together at that and go through that. So that's the first thing. So there's some good news there. I'm going to leave the exactly what until we get to it. The other thing is the Tauri driver that I've been working on this week, which is the thing that I've been really excited about, which maybe you've seen me be excited about it already. You can tell from some of the tweets that I've been posting this week if you follow me on Twitter. It's made some really good progress. It's not finished. Nothing's ever finished. But we're getting much closer to the point where it makes sense for this to be used for apps and, getting it. The whole point is to get production ready, right? We don't want to stay in alpha forever. And I think this makes that, a huge step forward in that direction. So we'll go into more detail on that. And then the other main thing that I want to bring to the fore, which I've tried, I'm trying not to be too obsessive about this, but I think it's really important occasionally, and this is one of those occasions, to try to encourage some support for what we're trying to do. And the main way for me in that is through GitHub sponsorships. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. I'm not going to harp on about it too much because that's not fair to everybody. But anyway, let's get down to it. Let's have a look at this post together, this thing, in case you haven't read it. Where is my... Well, I'm going to switch to this. You're going to see the craziness that's been my life for the last few weeks. I'll show you. Hello. So I've got, I don't know how many tabs that is. It's going to tell me. No, it's not going to tell me. Too many tabs. And that's just one window. And I actually closed about 5 or 6 windows just before coming onto this, but I just didn't have time to close them all. So I just got loads and loads and loads of windows. Which, well, I don't know what to do about that. I can't quit Chrome because I need it now. But anyway, right, let's go through this. I'm going to go through like highlights. We're not going to read through it or anything. Top level stuff about what's going on in native PHP land, and yeah, maybe we can chat about it if you've got questions or whatever. So first things first, what do we want to do for 2024? We want to make native PHP production ready, and really production ready. That's my, coming into 2024, this is taking a lot longer than I'd anticipated. There's a lot of effort going into it, but it's hard. It's a hard slog. It's a hard problem to solve. Can we draw some lines under where things can stop so that we can kind of capture a V1? And I think we've kind of had a really strong and stable set of functionality already for the alpha. There's been little trickly bits coming in, but the main blockers have been, does it have full platform support? So like I'm talking desktops mainly, but Windows as well as Linux and Mac. Obviously Linux and Mac have been quite stable. A lot of people have been asking for Windows. And then, because I feel like I've been teasing it forever, the Tauri driver, will that be ready? And I think it's really important, and this is why this is a big topic for me, and I'm so excited about it. I think it's really important that the Tauri driver, and we go into some detail why it's this way, but the Tauri driver is available as kind of almost the leading edge of production for native PHP, because Tauri is really exceptional. It's a solid piece of kit to use to build native applications, like browser-based, web-view-based native applications. And I think more and more people should be using it. I think it's nice for people to have the choice. So, you know, some people will prefer this, like the stability of Electron. The stability is that it's the same browser engine, the same web view in every platform. Whereas Tauri doesn't bundle the web view at all. So it's just leveraging the web view that's available to the system, which means on one platform you get one web view, on another you get a different one. And that, you know, if you need the stability, you're going to probably lean more towards Electron. If you don't mind some variability and you want to eke out even more performance or reduce bundle size and that kind of thing, then Tauri is really a good candidate. And I think it's a quality candidate, enough to say, you know, you can probably smooth over the differences in most of the WebView implementations for most applications with just, you know, adjusting your HTML, CSS and JavaScript, and maybe even putting up with there being some minor differences across platforms. So I dare to say that Tauri is probably the one to go for in most cases, but you know, I'd like to keep Electron available as well. So we're going to have both drivers available. So I'll move this into the middle. I'm trying to scroll and be teasing it and not give away what's going on in the background. Like, what's all this? Foobar. I don't know. Anyway, so secured builds. That's the next thing. Now, this is a tricky topic because the answer is we're probably not going to have secure builds in the sense of the code's obfuscated or it's completely encrypted or anything like that. And that's not for want of trying. We're definitely working towards that. But I just want to get for like V1 for this thing to be production ready enough for certain types of use cases that people are comfortable using it, deploying it. I'm just going and saying, I don't think we're going to be at the point where we're going to have some kind of code obfuscation or encryption. But that could change. You know, during the course of the year, there could be some advancements made. You know, we're working on it, so hopefully it comes through quicker, and then maybe by the time of V1 or some release soon after that, we'll have it. But I'm just not going to pin that into V1 and say, yes, we're definitely going to have that for V1. What does that mean? This is an important one to get right because I've had a lot of questions. I've seen a lot of questions and concern over it over the months since we rolled this out. We've had a lot of discussion about it. Basically, there are two sides to it as I see it. One is how comfortable am I with my source code being found, right? Which is one issue. And then the other one is basically, do I need this at all? Like, what are the other security implications from not doing this? And so let's take the first one. Your code in any application that you release is only a matter of time and effort away from being cracked, basically. So even if you use the best levels of encryption right now, and you had some, you know, which is also a sort of crazy thing to do, but if you had a really important application that you've built and the code needed to be highly protected, top secret stuff, whatever, in a few years, you know, I can use that loosely, I don't know what a few is, but there's every likelihood that that application would eventually be cracked because encryption algorithms are being attacked and hacked all of the time. So they're broken down as computing power and knowledge and things increase. So we have to, it's always just a case of staying a little bit ahead of the curve, or as much ahead as we can stay in those kinds of things, like if we're encrypting stuff especially. And if it's not encryption, it's obfuscation. And obfuscation is really, again, it's just the amount of effort that you've got to put in to reverse engineer something. So just getting straight out there, doesn't matter what you use, your code, if it goes out onto somebody else's machine, there is always a risk that it can be reverse engineered and somebody can gain access to it, copy it and do whatever they want to do with it. So having that in mind, how important is it that you encrypt your code or obfuscate your code? Well, it still serves another purpose, right? It still helps to protect the code against being changed. So we'll come on to that actually in a second. The first, before that is making your code obfuscated in this way or encrypted, whichever mechanisms you use. Most people employ one or the other. Probably some will employ multiple ones, but all it serves to do is slow down somebody else from getting your code. Now, that presents a problem with PHP because of the way that PHP works. It's not really been built with this in mind. So it's quite hard to do this and do it in a way that doesn't break your application or require you to make significant changes to your application. So it's that trade-off of how much effort do you put in on your side versus how much effort someone else is going to put in on their side. And then that comes down to like, how valuable is this code? Is it top secret stuff that you're putting in this app, or is it not? Is it just a basic tool? Because at the end of the day, if somebody really, really, really wants it, they're going to do whatever they can to get it. Other people have chimed in that conversation. I saw a message earlier that somebody posted, which I thought was a very good point, and it's one that I thought myself, but maybe not said out loud. You have copycats. So if your app is successful in any way, people don't need to steal the code to reproduce it. Like, that's just a convenience to them if they can. But the thing that you should, the value is not in your code, really. The value is in what it does and how you get that to your consumers. Okay, so that's my view on it personally. I am happy to debate that with people, but kind of this obfuscation encryption argument is kind of a little bit, well, you don't need it to get to production. So anyway, the other thing is there is something that it does do, which we've not really touched on yet, and I've said that we would. So the second part is what it protects your application from is quite important, actually. And the one thing that it does do really well that it protects your application from is change. So when your code has been bundled and deployed, if it's obfuscated in some way or if it's encrypted, there's a much lower chance that somebody can kind of dive in, figure it all out, make some change, and then have an instance of your application that's deployed on somebody's device work in a way that they want it to work, which is a really obviously dangerous thing to have happen. Now, this is where native PHP has a problem, because it is just scripts, PHP code. It's not compiled in any way. It's not bundled in. Yes, it all goes as a single executable, but if somebody digs hard enough, and it's not very hard, they can get to that source code and then they can change it. So they can see it for one thing. The problem is, as we said, that's maybe not much of an issue, but the big problem really is they can make changes to it. And that is something that we've got to solve. There's no way that we can get to a V1 and people being production ready and us saying, yay, go distribute your code to everybody, you know, whoever, and then suddenly they find out, oh, well, we can just go in and change this code and make it do whatever the hell we want. That's no good at all. So we've got to have a solution for that. But the thing is, whilst obfuscation, encryption, compilation is a way of doing that, it's not the only way of doing that. And we've already got some ideas, you know, put together some prototypes, but that's not fully there yet because it hasn't been the focus, but we're going to get that in place for V1. So we're going to be able to protect your application against changes. It doesn't mean that we'll be able to prevent changes. We'll be able to protect the application against them. And that means protecting users. And I think that's what we've got to aim for V1 if we can't get to, at the very least, if we can't get some kind of encryption, obfuscation work going on. I hope everybody sees where I'm coming from with that. Sorry that that one's taken so long to talk through. I think that's a really important one to get down. So, I've actually got this here and I'm just like, can you all see this? Do I need to ramp the size up a little bit? I'll do that anyway. So, what's next? Windows support and cross-compilation. We'll look at Windows support in a second. You've probably read ahead, so I'm not going to go through it. As I said, I'm not going to go into too much detail about these other bits, but the main thing here is, will you be able to build for all the platforms, and will you be able to do that from one platform, or how's that going to work? At the moment, most people are probably using native, getting it down, pulling it into their application, trying to build it, and either struggling to build for more, different platforms, or finding that you can't. I think I've not got too much familiarity with Electron. I believe that it's got some tooling for cross-compilation, which means that you could have it on one architecture and build for other architectures. I don't know how well that's going to work. Like your mileage may vary. I know that Tauri doesn't have that tooling as of V1.5 of Tauri. So in order to do that kind of building, there's no real cross-compilation at all. And that means it's got to be done on the architecture that you are targeting. Now, that's easy these days with things like GitHub Actions and what have you. And I think from native PHP's perspective, it's really just about supporting you in doing that, in the right way. So what that's going to come down to is documentation and examples. And I think that, we've got to target having that for V1 so that everybody can do this. We've already got some good documentation on how to get to production, but we probably just need to take that to the next level. Quick one about PHP version support. Hopefully this one's really obvious. It's on PHP 8.1 at the moment, is the bundled version of PHP that we make available to native PHP. We want to get that upgraded, obviously. That's should be fairly straightforward from our point of view. So we've got 8.2 and 8.3, and that will then just be up to you to decide which version you want to use. There's a little bit of spiel there about why that's a good thing. You should read that at your leisure. Let's have a quick look at notes. The Chris Pierce is one of the people that I'm working with at the moment to try and find a solution to this. His encryptor is very good. Like it's a good idea. It will be a viable solution at some point. I see he's making good progress with it. And I would love for that to work, but it doesn't at the moment. It's not going to be ready yet. Yeah, I've got a lot of faith in Chris. I've had some good conversations with him. I think he has got a good approach to doing this stuff. I would like to see him succeed. And of course, I'd love to have that as part of native PHP so that we can make use of that for everybody. But it's not there yet, unfortunately. Right, Tauri. hopefully, well, this isn't too difficult to comprehend because of what I've been doing this week, and that hopefully you're all excited about today. But this is coming. A big part of it's been the no web servers thing. We'll have a look at that. There's a lot of, I've obviously written way too much about that. Basically, it's coming in the next few weeks. We're exceptionally close to having it ready now, finally. And I can't wait to get it out to everybody because, well, for one, I just want it off my back for a bit. But also because I think you're going to love it and you're going to go and do awesome things with it. It's supporting Tauri v1.5 at the moment. But I'm very aware, if any of you are, Tauri 2 is kind of imminent, and there's quite some significant changes. So I don't know how quickly and easily we're going to be able to upgrade it to Tauri 2. Hopefully it's not going to be too painful because it shouldn't be too many drastic changes under the hood. But the way that we're doing things for native PHP, there might be some kind of fundamental things that would need adapting. Windows support. There's a lot here. It's coming. It is actually coming. Officially, we're going to get Windows support in there. And it's all being made available by the static PHP CLI library, which they recently sort of cracked making a Windows build. There's still some steps to make that work better so that it's easier to do in different places. At the moment it's quite manual, but it's getting there. So I'm very hopeful that that's going to be released in the next few weeks, and we can start bundling that in too. So look out for that. That should be coming. I'm not going to talk about this section because we're going to talk about that later. That's it. That's kind of all of the exciting. So has anybody got any questions about those bits before we go into the Tauri full in-depth, what the hell is this no service thing? Let's have a look if anybody's put anything anywhere else. There's a lot of chatter about encryption on Twitter still. Interesting. Okay, well, as there's no real questions coming through here, I am going to move on. Let's dig into this. We'll go back to the Tauri section for a second. I'm not going to read through all of this details, but the key thing that I want everybody to take away is why are we doing no servers? Like, it works in Electron. Why shouldn't we just do that some more? Do it in Tauri. And the answer, I did do it in Tauri. We had the PHP server on one side, and I set up there's a Rust package called Rocket. And there's a few other web server like packages, but Rocket seemed to be the one to go with. It was quite easy. There were problems. It was tricky. That's because I don't understand Rust. But more than that is the problem of, and something that I tried to tackle quite early on when I was doing it, is like, if I've got multiple applications running that are native PHP applications, I've now got multiple web servers running, and I can't have them all listening on the same port, because if one's open, then that port's going to be in use. So there's got to be like randomization of ports and retrying, and there's all these like little boot up things that you've got to do to make sure that your web servers are ready. And then when they're ready, make sure that they keep on running, and all, there's just like a whole headache around managing web servers. And then you've got the security problem. So as soon as you've got web servers running on a machine, on a user's machine, they're open to attack, they're open to abuse. And there are things that we're doing to mitigate some of that, but it kind of became obvious, well, why not just not have web servers? That's easier said than done, obviously. It's like, you take web servers out of the equation, well, how on earth do you run a Laravel app, which is a web application framework? It's reliant upon the web server, surely. Well, we'll see. It's actually probably not. But I think it comes down to what our definition of a web server really is. We think of it probably as Nginx, we think of it as Apache or Caddy or something else. And we've just kind of shifted that mentality a little bit. So we're going to dig into how that's been done. But what I wanted to get out of that is, if we can move away from web servers, not only do we free up like tons of resources, potential tons of resources for people, we also solve this security problem. We just don't have to deal with multiple servers having open ports and the potential that somebody can figure out where one of them is and start messing around with your application just by poking at some TCP socket. And yeah, we've got to, it just became an obvious, like, we've got to get rid of the web servers. There's no way that we can have production applications doing this. So what does that mean? Well, it means that we've got to come up with some other way of running the PHP environment that negates the web server, like just evades or avoids the web server altogether. And yeah, Raoul, welcome. I'm going to go into that now. We're going to go through it in detail. That's what this stream is all about. And I'm excited to finally kind of take you through it. So I teased it earlier in the week, basically when I kind of solved this problem. And yeah, I was too excited then, so I got a little bit lost in, I just need to make this quick video and get it out there and get people hyped about it. And I think today is an opportunity. I'm super excited still and kind of nervous, and I need to talk about it a little bit more, but hopefully in words and sentences that you can hear and understand more clearly than my rambling silent video from the other day. Right, so what's this question? Will it be very light? Will it be just as light on build? What do you mean, EJ? When you've qualified that, we'll come back to it. So let's have a look at how this flipping thing works. I don't even know. Like, I still haven't really figured out the best way of demonstrating this, honestly. So I'm just going to show you the code because I think that's the easiest way. I just need a second to kind of think through because I'm still like out of it. It's been a very, very busy week. So we've got this plugin for Tauri, right? Ignore all the rubbish files and the noise that comes through here. This is just Sublime not being very happy with the Rust code. I need a better Rust IDE. Is there a better Rust IDE? I think there is, but I haven't used it yet. So this is a Tauri plugin. This is the native PHP. This is going to sit on crates.io. For anybody who knows Rust ecosystem, this is going to be a crate that your application will basically pull down when you use the Tauri driver and install and then start compiling the Tauri version of your application with. And what it does is at the moment quite simple, because I've kind of gutted it to start with just focusing on doing this without a server. But we'll run through in detail. I don't know why this is erroring there. That's kind of annoying. Oh no, I've done something really wrong here in the middle of all of my changes, which means we're going to have to debug on the fly, clearly. Anyway, we'll come to that in a second. What was I saying? The starting point is once this plugin loads, okay, let's get where it actually loads into. This is the starting point of a Rust application or a Tauri application. And what's happening here, we can actually ignore some of this. I'm going to remove it because that's just leftovers that I forgot to get rid of. We can get rid of that. So this is the point. This is the main difference in this file from what Tauri documentation tells you to do by default. So this on its own, without this line, will just kind of create your empty application. And depending on the config that you've got, like the default config for Tauri is this JSON file. This isn't default, this is very heavily configured towards native PHP now, but the default would basically open a window and show you your application, some basic version of your application. But with this plugin in place and those changes in that conf, basically this moves us into a new way of doing things. It says, right, the Tauri plugin for native PHP is going to take over, it's going to do all of this stuff for us. So this is like the only difference we have to make to the default Tauri setup, which is quite cool. And from there, it loads this. This is the plugin file. So this is where we basically say, I'm the native PHP plugin, and here is what I do. And the traditional way of doing, like, plugins would just be for adding special functionality to your Tauri application, you know. But this one is like, this is really where your application does all of its work, because we're trying to offload the work to PHP, right? So what we were doing here before was, like, we would start what they call the sidecar, which is the PHP process, running the relevant PHP command for this, or executable for this architecture. So whatever architecture the application is now running from, it would go, okay, I've got a PHP binary for Linux, you know, ARM, and which is the CPU architecture. So I've got ARM64 on Linux. Here's the PHP binary for that. Let's run that with these parameters, you know, kind of options. And before, that was just, let's start the PHP web server, you know, PHP -s, blah, blah, blah. Point it at the root of the app, which is our source files that all get pulled into here. And then, hey presto, we're serving it via a web server. But that web server is always running and it's always waiting for requests. That is the problem that we're trying to solve and get away from. And so it meant changing the command that we run, both in its timing and what we do, from like the start of the whole application to, on every request to our backend, our PHP code, we need to do something else. We need to get into that process. We need to handle it differently because we haven't got a web server anymore. We need to tell it what to do. And we'll break this down because this is like this is the key sort of crunch point for us for how this works. So what's happening is every time a page gets loaded in Tauri, in the web view that your Tauri application makes available, we run this code. There's caveats to that, but we'll come on to those in a minute because it's not important. And when this code runs, it basically runs the PHP executable with some parameters. And those parameters match the request that's been made in the browser. And then all we have to do, is return the response back from the command into Rust and let Rust handle that and handing it off to the browser. So we've effectively gotten rid of the web server and replaced it with just command input and output, which is what a web server is doing as well. So this is still technically a web server, really. But there isn't a traditional web server in there. There's nothing that's generalized HTTP processing. And we have to do it slightly differently because of the way that Tauri works, and that introduces some other problems, and we'll come on to that. But before we get onto that, the bit that I wanted to go through first is how we've chosen to do it, how I've implemented this on the Laravel side to make it work, because I think it's quite cool. It's simple, but it's cool, right? To get there, we have to think about how does Laravel actually handle web requests anyway? So what happens in a normal web request? The first thing that happens, should happen, depending on your setup, I'm assuming default setup. So first thing that should happen is it should try and load this public index.php. Hopefully you're all familiar with that if you're Laravel people. And this is like the bootstrapper for the whole application. For every single request, this is where Nginx or Apache or whatever that you're using is coming in, like it's sending the data from the inbound HTTP request into this script. And it's this script that then does everything else. This is your front controller. And this is, it's really standard, like everybody should read the front controller and understand what's going on, because this is quite straightforward ultimately, even if there's a lot of hidden complexity in there. I'm not going to break all of that down now, but suffice to say, the most important parts is it knows how to load all of your dependencies using the Composer autoloader. Great, we love that. It does something to set up the app, whatever that is, which it's the app instance itself, an instance of the class, and then it makes a kernel. I don't like the word kernel. If anybody's heard Taylor talk about it, he doesn't like the word kernel either, and it's gross, but it makes a kernel, and then the kernel is what handles the request. Like the words that I'm using is almost exactly how the code's written out here. So we've got the request goes through the kernel, and we get a response, and we basically return the response back to the user or back to the web server. The web server sends it back to the client, and then we do some stuff at the end, and that's it. It's all cleaned up. So this lot, what is it? Not even 60 lines of code is what everything in a Laravel app runs through. Almost everything. There's another one of these, and it's called the artisan command. Everybody knows this one. When you're running in the CLI, PHP artisan is exactly the same thing. It's just using a different kernel. So it's instead of the web kernel, which we can prove which one it is, the HTTP kernel, and here it's actually written out. It's the console kernel, right? So different kernels, same process, effectively. Request comes in, it gets handled, the output gets piped out to the terminal in this case. So there's nothing really different, like the application's still running through the whole same bootstrapping process, except for the different kernels and the different inputs coming from slightly different places. This is a really good thing to understand about Laravel in general, and a good way of building these kind of applications. So when I kind of was thinking through, this became like the obvious thing to do. We need a bootstrapping script that does it for our way of doing it in the context of Tauri without a web server. It's not CLI. It's not a web server strictly, it is, because we've made something that looks like a web server, but it's not a traditional web server. It's not doing a lot of the stuff that a traditional web server would be doing for us. So we've got to handle it differently. So this is what I came up with, and it lives in the Tauri driver package. So it's not the plugin, the Tauri plugin for native PHP is a Rust package. The Tauri driver for native PHP is a PHP package, which has got some other bits and pieces in it, and it will install the Tauri environment into your application. But the main part of this is the commands that you'll use, like native PHP commands and some other bits and pieces. And what I've added here is it's Bootstrapper, the same as the public/index and the artisan command, but customized for native PHP. And this is what it is. And it should look really familiar. You know, this is, I've cut it down because code comments are unnecessary from my point of view here. If you've come this far, you will already have read the ones in the default Laravel public index. So you should know what all of this is trying to do. I've kept most of it the same. The only thing that I think I've removed is maintenance mode, because I didn't really see a point for that. Maybe it will come back, but we'll see. Everything else is almost the same, and we're going to look at the differences, right? So first thing to note is up top, the kind of request that we're using is not the Illuminate request. What does that look like? Illuminate HTTP request. It's very similar. We'll see it's very similar, but it's not exactly the same. And then we run through some of these paths are different just because of the context of where we're running it from. We capture the request, but note that we get that from argv, not from, well, where do we get it from traditionally? We don't. What does that look like in index.php? It's just request capture. And that's doing a whole load of, like, under the hood, it's using Symfony, Symfony's HTTP library, and it's plucking all of the relevant bits out of the various super globals that we've got available in PHP. So it's going, you've got some stuff in post, you've got some stuff in servers, you've got some stuff in env, and I bring all of that together. And, you know, it kind of knows about the headers that have come in and all of this stuff, and it's just working it all out. And then here we don't have any of that because we're not in the SAPy environment. You know, there's no web server that's doing all of that stuff and populating all of those super globals for us. Some of them are, but not in the right way. You're not going to have things like request URI or HTTP method because there isn't any. It's not providing any of that. So we have to get some of that ourselves. I'll show you how that works. But so we're passing that into this capture method of our custom request class. And then the other main difference here is how we output the response. So there are two things to note that are different about the way that this response is handled. One is we do just echo it out here in the terminal. If we do that, I think it will do the same here. In fact, we can try it. If we do what we would do against a Laravel application, what am I trying to say? If we were acting like the web server, this is kind of what we would do, right? We would go public PHP public index.php. Now, I expect this is going to have a load of errors because we're not in the web server context, and this is expecting a whole web server environment to be set up. But actually it works somehow. So magically Laravel has kind of helped. What's it done? It's sort of silently, elegantly failed for us. So we still get some sensible output. And this is good. Like, this is a good starting point in many ways. This is what we want. We want output in the terminal. We want it to be in the std out so that Rust can pick it up and do something with it. But it's not enough. This is just the HTML, and it's broken HTML because there's bits here that are missing because we've lacked the context of the web server. It's not giving us all of those environment variables. So this would be really broken, and it's not enough. So it's really, really like double broken, double bad. So, okay, we need a different way of doing it, and that's what this is. So we output the headers first. So we need those headers. We do need them. I'm not really using them very well at the moment because I haven't completed this. It's not finished, but we're going to need them. We're going to need to be able to pass the headers in both directions. So we need the headers to come out of the response and into the terminal. You know, we didn't get those here. We just got the HTML. And we need the content. And we need the content to kind of work the way that we expect it to work. So we're going to send the headers and we're going to separate them from the content. And when you do this, it actually ends up looking quite sensible, reasonable. I think it's going to break because some of the way that I've got things set up here. But we'll give it a go anyway. I've got to remember how I do it. I need to go vendor. Well, I don't need to remember. It's in here. Let's just swipe this. This is literally what it's doing. Okay, so we're in the demo Laravel application, and our Rust code is going vendor native PHP, Tauri source bootstrap PHP, which is the bootstrap file, and then it needs some extra stuff, right? So this is where I end up just making it look like a web request, because I think that's familiar and that's what maybe people will expect. It doesn't need to be like this, but it works. Let's dig into how that works before we do it, because I do know that we're going to get errors. But remember here we were getting from argv. The first request on argv is always the command. So in this case, PHP vendor, blah, blah, blah. From that point forward, we get the arguments that are coming in. So each one separated by space, get, slash, etc. And there's more that we can use. Let's have a look at this request class to see what's different here. I override a few methods only from the default illuminate request, just to do the bits that we need, because mostly it's actually right and okay. We just need to adapt it for our context. And so here's what happens. The capture method, I override that because we need to pass in arguments to capture. And then really the only reason to do it here is just because of timing. Like, I want the capture to work in the same way that it does for Laravel. But then once that's done, I want to do some work with it. Like, I need to adapt the class with the extra stuff that we're getting from the command. And so I'm just doing that work here. It might not be the best place, but so I get the arguments coming into this dynamically because capture doesn't take any arguments by default. So we can't maybe I can change the signature here and make it explicit, but I just want it to be open-ended and flexible for now. You'll see I've actually moved them down to here, and this is where it comes in. But anyway, this feels like nice and clean for this point in time. So we call capture, the parent capture, and then we hydrate from Tauri call, and we pass in our arguments. So in this case, what will that look like? It should be get as the first one, which is our method, and then slash as the URI, which, you know, we all know is like home, you know, sort of the root of the application. So if there's a root for the application, then there should be a HTML response at that point. And there's some other stuff which we'll come on to. But basically, then we've got this request object, which is packaged up with all of the stuff that the application should need in order to do the rendering of the HTML in the way that it's going to make sense for the Tauri context. And what does that mean? Well, we have to add some stuff just to make things tick over. So we explicitly add a request URI and request method, and there's probably more that's needed here too. Like, I haven't thought of everything yet, but this is what's like minimum got me over the line of like, this works. And then the other important thing that we're doing is we're changing the HTTP scheme. Now, we glazed over that in the Rust side. We'll come back to that because I want to join those dots later in a slightly different way. We're just going to focus on the request response cycle for now. So when we've built up our extra bits around the request, you can see it's not much, it's quite straightforward. Then we can carry on with what the rest of the bootstrapping normally does, which is, you know, the same default Laravel stuff. It's just, here's your response, do whatever, you know, like send whatever's calling me, here you go, do what you want to do with it. And in our case, it's Rust that's calling this, and then our work moves over to the Rust side. So there's really not much that's changed on the Laravel side at all to make this work. And that's quite cool. I'm really, really pleased with the minimal amount of effort that I've had to go to get this to work from the Laravel side. It's a testament to how great Laravel is as a product. But then what happens on the Rust side? Well, let's go back here. So we get our output from the command, and then we have to do some work with it because we've got this big long string of headers and HTML, and we need to split those up. And yeah, maybe again there'll be a better way of doing that in the future, but for now it's like it's a big long string, so we need to do some work with it. And we'll go into the detail of that in a bit, but suffice to say, we take the headers, we divide all of the headers up, we take the content, we've got these two, like multiple separate pieces, not two, but all these separate pieces now, and we chuck them into a response. It's also a response class. All right, I just glazed over that, sorry. It's this response builder, which is a Tauri API. You know, it's like, here, there's this class that says like, you can build a response, and that looks eerily similar to, you know, Symfony's HTTP response class, and therefore, you know, Laravel's own response class. So it all feels like it lines up really nicely. You just have these things, and they're all kind of the same, and we just pass the same bits from one to another. The tricky part with Rust is it's so type sensitive that any little quirky, out of the ordinary things here will throw this all out and your app will crash, which is really good because that's how Rust is so performant, and that's great. But when you're coming from a PHP world where you expect to just kind of tab over to the browser, hit refresh or whatever, and it kind of works or it doesn't work, you know, but you kind of go, oh, okay, it's not working. It's a different world altogether. So when things crash, you get these horrible, you know, on Mac, you get the alert that says this crashed and gives you all of these like memory dumps and stuff, and it's just like, but what I'm trying to do, what I'm hopefully getting to a point of doing, is where this can handle most of those scenarios gracefully for you, and you don't really ever see that from this. You might still see it, frankly, but I can't save you from everything, I'm afraid. And we send the response back to the web view. That's it. Like, once we've done this body call here, we're passing our content from the CLI response effectively into this response builder body. It then fleshes that out to the web view. We'll see that work, hopefully see that working in a minute. I mean, you've already seen it, but yeah. So I said we were going to look at what's this special scheme thing that's going on, the PHP : / stuff that you've seen. And we'll start here because this is where it gets introduced. But before we do that, I'm going to have a swig of water because I have a dry mouth now from all the talking. And I'm going to read through the chat. Oh, EJ didn't ever get back to us about what he means by light on build. It would be great if you're still there to come back and help us out with what you mean by that question. Maybe somebody else has got some thoughts on what he meant. Thanks, Raoul. I think so too. Can you swap Laravel for Lumen? I used to be kind of bullish on Lumen. I thought it was the right thing in certain contexts. I just don't think it's really being well supported anymore. And I don't know why folks will use it. Maybe there is a place for it still. I don't think it's here. Like, what we're trying to do here is a full web application with views. You've got Blade and database, like all of the stuff that you typically want to have in a Laravel application, you probably want here. And Lumen cuts a lot of that out by default. So then you end up having to put a load of it back in. So I don't really know why you would do that in this case. If you really, really, really wanted to eke out those last few bits of performance, maybe. But I just don't think, this isn't where, between Laravel and Lumen is not where you're going to get the most performance gains for your, bang for your buck. So it's just, that was a bit of a, no, just use Laravel. Don't try and swap it out. Roll, thanks you, looking forward to. Yeah, well, let's see what happens. I can only hype it up and show people the door. Who said that? Morpheus. Somebody. No, I haven't got delusions of grandeur or anything like that. I think what we're trying to do is just show this is possible. We're trying to make it as robust as possible, and if people build some cool stuff with it, great. If it just helps you, create some apps that you share between friends, that's also great. I would love to see some of those. Let's see what happens. Remember that this is a web view thing. We're intentionally focusing our attention on, I'm building in PHP and Laravel because the context is a web view. And it's a convenient way to use the knowledge and experience that I've already got from web application development land in the kind of desktop, on-device, native context. And games, yeah, it'll be a stretch. Maybe some simple ones that you would do in a web view. But anything intense is going to be, maybe you shouldn't use web technologies for that. But I think there's a lot of use cases that this can work really well for. There's probably a bunch of applications that are already out there, built in Laravel, that you can adapt to this very, very quickly. Yeah, so we'll see. But I'm excited to see what people keep building. I'd love to. We've got a place for people to share what they build. Where is it? I never remember the name of it. It's like awesome something. Yeah, Awesome-NativePHP. So go to this and create a PR when you've got something, and we'll get it added to the list. I was looking at this one the other day, actually, because you've mentioned games, Raoul. This was quite an interesting one. It doesn't actually use native PHP. It doesn't really use PHP for the game at all. It's a bit of a gimmick because it's all JavaScript. Yeah, it's like a JavaScript port of Doom, but sitting on top of native PHP to render the page, which is kind of cool. But yeah, not really leveraging that power very well. Anyway, share your stuff. We'll all get excited about how great it is to see people building native applications using PHP. Right, let's get back into this. So what's this PHP scheme all about? So the first thing is in Tauri, you can get in the middle of the request response process, and this is what's enabled us to do this kind of stuff. And I haven't looked, but I'm pretty sure you'd be able to do this in Electron as well. And this is why I think we can port this, principally we can port this to Electron too. But in order to do it in Tauri, you have to do it through this custom scheme protocol. You can't use HTTP. It's like HTTP and the HTTPS protocols are secret, special things that it's never going to give up because it's using them in a certain way, and the logic for handling how those are handled is all baked into that environment just for convenience, I guess, because those are the standard ones that people would expect to use. But so we can't get in the middle of those because they're like too tightly integrated with the way that it all works. So we have to use something else. So I've just picked PHP because, well, we're doing PHP. So this can be called anything we want as long as we're consistent. PHP seems to make sense to me. Maybe there'll be some problems with that. I don't know, but let's stick with it. And then the rest of like everything should just work the same. And it's basically just saying what it looks like in the browser. You could have FTP, you could have, oh God, I don't even know, Telnet. There's a whole bunch of scheme protocols of default ones that you might have used in different contexts. And we're just like, you can put, many of them work in a browser because they're not fixed to HTTP and HTTPS. But here, we just want something custom that we can go, okay, we know that this is this is meant for our PHP process. This is what we want to do. And once we've got that, our URLs need to look like they're using that scheme. So all of the URLs need to change from using HTTP or HTTPS to using PHP : / as the starting point. All cool with me so far? Hopefully that's kind of like straightforward because we're all used to HTTP and HTTPS and how that works in our Laravel applications. So it's just kind of swapping all of that out for PHP. And then the URLs can be kind of whatever we want them to be. I mean, like, I've gone with localhost just because it feels like it makes sense. That's kind of standard approach, but it doesn't need to be that either. It could be anything we want. All we're doing at this point is string matching on parts of the URL, the scheme and a host. And that's the only bits that really are needed. You need to have a scheme and you must have a host. Those are like the fundamental bits of a URL. And then you have the extra bits like the path and the port and the blah, blah, blah. There's a whole load of other stuff. And we might come to leverage much of that at some point in maybe the distant future of native PHP when it's a roaring success, but not right now. Right now we just need PHP and we're going to stick with localhost. And then I'm going to skip over this bit because this whole section is something else. And there's a reason why it's here, because they might be like, why are we handling assets in PHP? Well, we'll come back to it. The key thing is we need to tell our Laravel application to use PHP : / because if we don't, it's still going to try and return HTTP or HTTPS. So how do we tell our Laravel application that we're using a different scheme and you need to apply this scheme everywhere? Well, it turns out that's actually kind of tricky. So there's a few places that we have to do it. First place is the app URL. Right? If we don't get our app URL right, it's not going to work. If in your env, where's that right one? Yeah. So somewhere in here, like I've got it as HTTP localhost. I don't want it to be HTTP localhost. When it renders these pages for me via the command line interface process that we've got here, I need it to be PHP. So I have to override the app URL. Hey Adrian, welcome. And actually, that's the only thing really from this side that we do. You can see the asset URL as well. We'll come on to that one in a second because that's tied up with this stuff that I collapsed. The other part of it is actually back in the Laravel side, and this is where it is slightly more complicated. We looked at this already. In the request class, we override the scheme and this scheme and host setup. And all I've done is force those to be PHP and PHP localhost. And this is another reason why we need a custom request class, because we don't want to mess with the default one, which is dealing with HTTP and or HTTPS. It's like managing both of the potentials of all of that and figuring out which one to use in which circumstances and merging it with the host name and all of this dynamic stuff that we do in web world because we don't know what server it's going to be on and we don't know what domain name it's going to be using, blah, blah, blah. We cut all of that out. We know that we're in a PHP scheme context because that's been defined by Tauri, and we've been told at the start of when we run by this environment config, we're in that context. So I'm booting this bootstrap file which says use this request. I know that I'm a PHP person. I'm a PHP application. And by PHP, I mean the PHP scheme. So I'm a PHP/:/application. That's what I want to be. So I'm forcing that to be that always. Don't foresee any need to make that dynamic or anything more complicated at this stage. But, this is the place where that would happen if it needs to be. And the other bit around it is, obviously, it's fine telling the application you're in this PHP context, but when it comes to generating URLs, what happens then? It turns out the URL generator in Laravel still really likes to hang on to HTTP and HTTPS. It's like a separate piece of code that also references HTTP and HTTPS. And it's really, that's kind of annoying. So we have to swap out the URL generator. We were looking at this a couple of weeks ago, and Adrian was here, and he said the same thing that you just said, string replacement. We're going to talk about that a bit more now, because you've brought that up. But basically, what we have to do at this point in time is go and swap the default URL generator with our custom URL generator so that we can get all of the URLs generated with the PHP : / scheme attached to them. Okay, so quickly, how does that happen? Well, in our service provider, we have to, we basically just bind our new, it probably doesn't even need to be this complicated, but this is what we did. I think, was it last week? I can't remember. We bind our PHP URL generator into the container. And that's another great thing about Laravel, is that it does this asset URL, well, not just asset URL, but all URL management for us can be run through the application. And that we can swap it out, we can swap that implementation out for our own at runtime without having to dig into the core, because we're using the dependency injection. So that was relatively straightforward to do. I mean, if you watched me do it last week, it was maybe it was like banging your head against the wall, but overall this was quite straightforward to do, and that's that. And the actual URL generator just overrides the default one and just forces the scheme to be the one that we want it to be. And what does that mean? Well, it means that whenever we call the root helper or the URL helper or the asset helper or anything inside of Laravel that creates URLs for us is going to run this instead of the default one, which means we're going to end up with PHP : / on the front of any absolute URLs that it generates. And that's exactly what we need, so that when we move between different pages in our app, or it's got different requests going to the back end via fetch, Ajax, whatever, that they're all using that scheme, so that they all run through Rust in the same way, so that they all run through our PHP process code that we've seen that the plugin has got. And that brings us on to the assets. So yes, assets need to go through this as well. Hold that thought. I'm going to talk about string replacement now, Adrian, because you've mentioned it. Why do we not want to do this as string replacement? There are a few things. I think we talked about these last time, but one is we can't tell what the developer's intent is if they've just hand-rolled URLs. So if somebody's put in a URL to a web page, even on, you know, the same domain as the application, potentially, maybe they want to do something specific that if we just do blunt force string replacement, we can't help them there. You know, like we've overridden what they've tried to do. They've not been clear on what their intention is, and we've destroyed something for, you know, we're breaking something for them. So I really wanted to avoid that. And you know, I think when you brought that up originally, the point was to solve this problem for everybody in a really simple way, which is an absolutely fine suggestion. However, I think it's really important that we do it the right way, as I said before. And I think the right way is to say all of these helpers that you use, all of the default stuff that's available to you in Laravel, if you're using that the way that it's intended to be used, this will work for you. So it's only really going to solve it for people who aren't doing things like the right way. Like if you're not using the asset helper and you're hard coding, you know, your image URLs into your blade views, then, well, you'll have loads of problems if you were going to deploy on a web server for a start. But also, you know, it's just like, it's not good. It's not going to help here. Like it shouldn't help you here. We shouldn't try and fix that. I think you should use the asset helper, you should use the root helper, the action helper, the URL, whatever, you know, like all of the things that you would normally use when you're building a Laravel application to do things in a way that's sort of flexible and, you know, works long term. If you do that, this is going to work absolutely fine for you. So no crazy string replacement work needed, and this all works. So we got there in the end, man. Thanks for your support on it last week. This then, where are we for time? We've been going for an hour and a half nearly. Wow. How's everybody doing? You holding up? You bored of my voice? Should I put on a different voice? No, I'm not going to do that. So the assets, right? They still have to come through this PHP process. Because, well, not the PHP process, this is the difference. They're coming through the PHP scheme protocol that we're registering. Because in Tauri, well, maybe it's not even just a Tauri problem. The web views still try to abide by a lot of the cores and, what's the other one? Can't remember. You know, all these like security protections for cross domain requests and things happening all over the place, where you want to kind of tighten that security as much as possible. The browser does some of it for you, and then it offloads a bunch of it to, you know, the server can send headers back that instruct it to behave in certain ways. And so you can configure some of it. But in this context, I don't really want much of that. I still need some of it, but I kind of just wanted to go, I can just, you know, for the assets, I just want to call out to, you know, some Tauri has HTTP localhost.assets, or even it's got its own protocol like asset something, asset / localhost, and then the path to a JavaScript file or an image file or something, and it's going to handle that and serve it back to the browser. But when our main page is served via the PHP scheme, the default environment doesn't let us, and there's no way of kind of getting into this process within Tauri. Believe me, I've looked. That's what all of these, where have they gone? There, you know, all of these windows were flipped, man. That's sorry about that. is me trying to discover, like, how the heck do I get past that in Tauri? Well, you can't. Basically, you have to have everything on the same scheme. And we do, normally, it's all on HTTP or HTTPS. So it's fine. So can't cross like these scheme boundaries. Cool. Once I kind of got that in my head, I was like, right. So all of our requests, every single one of them has got to come through this protocol that we write here. Some of them are going to run through and actually call PHP, right? It's going to do all of that work, boot up Laravel, pass it the parameters, like the request, and then give us a response, and blah, blah, blah. Others don't have to do that. And this, effectively, this is then turning into like a web server. It's a very, very basic one, but it is like, I'm saying, does the URL look like this? Well, then that's an asset. And you should go and fetch that from the file system and pipe it back just straight out and stop here. Don't do any more. And that's exactly what this does. It goes like, okay, you've explicitly asked for an asset, and I do it by the path because that's nice and easy. I don't do it by like, does this look like a real file? You know, does it exist? Except, does it have size? What, you know, all those old Apache things that are like htaccess rewrite things. I just go, oh, you're looking at this path. That's an asset. Cool. I know that. I know what to do with that. I'm going to go and fetch it. Here it is. Get the resource. Get the MIME type. Send it back to the browser. Cool. That means we handle JavaScript, CSS, images, kind of anything. I mean, I'm sure there's going to be a few things, edge cases here that it doesn't work really well with. But basically, it will handle assets through the same process, but it doesn't run them through PHP. That's all you need to know about that. Anything that needs to run through PHP runs through PHP. Anything that doesn't will run through here. Now, the dividing line of that is entirely up to the developer. So if you put a URL to something called PHP localhost assets that isn't, then it's not going to work the way that you want it to do, and that might crash your app. Honestly, right now it might, but you know, we'll make that better in time when we've learned more about how this works in the field, out in the wild. And if you are trying to run something through PHP, and somehow you've ended up making the URL look like _assets, or whatever the pattern is going to be when it's finalized, then it's not going to work, is it? Like, it's just do it the right way and it'll work. So this is fine. Cool. That's that. Hopefully it makes sense to everybody. And I feel like this has taken me too long to get to this point, honestly, but it's worth it. So shall we try and make it work? Try and see. I feel like I started in the terminal at one point and we're going to actually do it. I said, oh, it's going to break. Let's see it break. So this is because these paths are wrong for the way that I've got it set up in local development at the moment. So I'm going to just duplicate these and comment the originals out just so that we can see it. I've got to remember, where am I? Let's do so I need to come out of source, out of native PHP Tauri, I think. No, maybe not. Oh no, I do. I need to go all the way out, and I need to go all the way back into Tauri demo vendor. Just, yeah, it's gross, but that's where we're at. And this one needs to be the same. It needs to be, well, let's just copy this. It's close to, but not quite. What did I do wrong? I don't know. Maybe, yeah, it just needs to be an empty JSON thing. So this is what we were talking about before, the headers coming out along with the body. And this is it. And you'll see here, because we're in, like I have not really treated it the same, but we're in this sort of context. In fact, I should do native, what was it? Some of these environment variables should have this one, and I probably don't need an app URL, but I will. No, in fact we won't. We're just going to say native PHP running equals true. And then I think I can get rid of some of this. Maybe. No, it's still going to be a pain. Whatever. But it's doing it kind of the way that we would do it from the Rust side. And the point is that it's got things in the way that we've asked it to do it. So when it goes back into Rust, this is going to look like it's come from a web server, but it hasn't come from a web server. It's come just from straight calling the script and getting the response, which is what the web server does. But it's like there's no server here. There isn't. There's nothing holding the PHP process open. We're not locking up ports or memory or anything. And there are a load of caveats to it. We'll talk through those for a minute as well. But this is cool. It means that we don't have to open up web servers at the start and a whole bunch of other things. It means that our app's faster because we're not waiting for those web servers to be available, and it's more reliable because we're not going to keep them running around, and it's more secure because we've now not exposed this stuff to the user system. So there's just like a whole load of benefits from doing it this way. Yeah, there are a load of challenges as well, but it's worth solving those challenges, and we're getting somewhere. And we're getting there with it. Basically, it's happening. We'll see it working in a second. We'll put this back the way that it was. We'll get it back working. What are the caveats first, though? We've got some issues, and there's still issues to be solved. Sorted out the JavaScript loading. I was talking about it last week. That's what's been fixed. Images and all of that stuff. Moving between pages and everything works the way that you'd expect it to work. Even there were problems with like returning error responses. I haven't tested one of those, but debug code was causing a problem because of the way that the var dumper, Symfony's var dumper, which is what DD and dump use, that basically it would, in the CLI, it would interpret as it's being run from the CLI, and the CLI dumps the output of those at the top. And that presents a problem to the Rust side because the Rust side is expecting that output to be down here somewhere, so it couldn't split the headers away from the content. So to overcome that, I end up doing this, which is something you can do. Didn't know if you knew that. You can do this. You can set the var dumper format via env. And so I force it to always be HTML, which may or may not be that useful. Like sometimes I want that output from the terminal process. We'll see the terminal process for Tauri running alongside our application. Sometimes I would like that to be terminal-like, but I can't have it both ways, unfortunately, at the moment, until we figure something better out. But that works for now. But yeah, it does create some output in the terminal occasionally. But that's fine, because we shouldn't really be working there. We should be working in the browser, just like we do when we're doing web development. Anyway, what else? There's some overhead, right? Because we haven't got this process hanging around waiting to serve requests. A typical web server setup, you might have actually a handful or more, depending on your workload. You might have 10, 20, 50, don't know, just like whatever your machine, your server can manage. processes waiting to serve PHP. Maybe you're not, maybe you're in the traditional serverless world and it's not like that at all, but I don't really know. The point is, there's not something waiting around for firing up PHP, your Laravel application, and then returning the response relatively quickly. We have to start it every time, which is a trade-off. What difference does it make? I've found that it adds about 60 to 70 milliseconds to every request. PHP boot up is actually quite fast, but I would like to bring that down. I think we're not going to get rid of it completely, honestly. I think we'll get to a point where we break even with what you'd get with a web server. So for every request, it'll be about the same as what you'd get if you were using a web server in terms of response time, which on a local machine is still bloody fast. It's like most requests probably just around the 100 millisecond mark, which if you're used to it being slightly not immediate response from your UI in an application, is pretty normal. I would still like it to be faster. I think it can be faster. I'm already sort of investigating how we can use things like opcache and whatever to make that speed up some, and maybe we'll get it down. Like I would say my target there is to get it under the 100 millisecond mark for most requests. So obviously I can't control it for every request because that depends what your app is doing. But if you can get it under that 100 millisecond mark is kind of the barrier for what feels quick when you're clicking around on a computer screen, like when it's not being thrashed by memory or CPU somewhere else, it feels responsive. It's like you click and it happens immediately. It's like under 100 milliseconds. So that's the target. But yeah, because we're already on localhost and nothing's going over the network, it already feels like we're mostly there. So that additional 60 odd milliseconds is not that bad, but yeah, I'd like to get rid of it, or as much as we can. This will be a new kind of app server, like PHP app server back in. I don't remember PHP app server. If you got, maybe link me that on somewhere. I don't think you can send links in the chat here, but yeah, send me a link. Oh, there's different chat types. Have I missed any messages because I haven't been following the right chat? That's gross. Thanks, YouTube. Why can't you just give me the... Anyway. Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, an app server. I don't really know what app server was doing, but it is kind of an app server. But I think the point is that it's all bundled and baked into Tauri, and maybe, hopefully, Electron eventually. Let's see. I'm not... Technology can be used in lots of weird and wonderful ways. It's going to be open source. We'll come on to that in a moment. But, so people can do what they want with it, ultimately. But yeah, I think this is kind of cool. I'm happy with it. That's basically what it comes down to. I'm super excited about it because it's unlocked a whole load of potential. It's got me excited about native PHP again. So I've been excited about it the whole time, but, it's just like, it's been a bit of a slog, I'm not going to lie. So, okay, what now? Well, I want to get this running in the proper application so you can see it. I feel like this is going to be a problem and I don't really know why, and I haven't read this properly yet, so I need to read this and figure out what's going wrong here. Mismatched types. Right, I've changed something here that I shouldn't have changed. I don't know why. Expected option string found blah. Maybe that's just this interpreter being silly because I haven't. Let's just. I don't think I've done that at all. I think it should be fine. I don't like the way whatever tool I'm using. Rust enhanced plugin for Sublime doesn't really work very well, which is why I want a better IDE for this Rust stuff. But yeah, Haven't got there yet still. Right, let's do this. Can't remember what the command is. PHP artisan native serve. This is what should run it. We'll soon find out if there are any problems because it will tell us. But this is kind of the final piece, bringing it all together, hopefully. It's building, so that's a good sign. Oh no, it's just building the packages. Build the plugin. When we get to the final bit, there we go, it's working. Cool. Ta-da! It works. Cool, okay. So I want to show you what's going on now in the browser environment to make all of this happen. Just to like round it all off and just kind of see it all kicking together. So each one of these is prefixed with our scheme, as you'll see. But it behaves just like it would on HTTP or HTTPS. This asset, you can see it's got that special _assets prefix, and then it just goes to whatever the URL is, so build assets, blah, blah, blah. Just tie that up. Where does that live? So actually, it lives in the vendor native PHP Tauri resources source. This is your application. It's been copied into this folder, your Laravel application and all of its vendor directory and everything. It's copied into here, and then that's not right. That's public. That is where I want to go. In the vendor directory. No, sorry, that's completely wrong. I mean, I'm already in the vendor directory. This is weird because it's sort of what's recurring, nested thing. We've got the vendor directory minus this package goes into this package in the vendor directory with the other vendor directory. So yes, it all gets duplicated and it's really gross, but it's the best way of doing it, unfortunately. And then from there, the Tauri process can say, I know about this folder, this resources source folder that you've got. In fact, it doesn't even need to go to resources, it just goes up a level because this is where Tauri actually exists. The Tauri application's here. Your Laravel application is adjacent to it, and it just goes, oh, in this source upper level, in this source folder, and then all of your assets are going to be in public. So as long as you've got assets in public, they'll be bundled with your application, and they'll be accessible through this _assets URL. And so it can load those files really easily and really quickly, because Rust is really good at doing that, and serve them back to the browser. And that's what this does. So, or the web view. I keep saying browser. It is a browser, but it's a web view. You know what I mean. We've created our own web browser, folks. No, we haven't. So this one is just some JavaScript file that my Veep process has built. You know, I don't even know what's in there. Probably nothing. And then this image, which it's kind of gone, oh yeah, here you go. There's an image. Look how quickly it served this. There was no waiting around, and it took 3 milliseconds to download it. How big is this file? 46927. You know, it's not massive. What's that? 50k. But it wouldn't download in 3 milliseconds on HTTP. Like, obviously, it's going over the network. There's a whole load of things in between you and that asset. But the point is, it's not that it's faster. We all know it's going to be faster. It's on your local machine. It's just like, it's ridiculously fast. 3 milliseconds to get assets. So all of your app UI stuff that's not, it's not kind of processing things, it's not running through PHP or hitting a database or getting PHP to call the file system and doing it. That's all going to happen like that. The most costly thing is your PHP stuff, and we're going to try and bring that down even more as well. That brings me to the Livewire one. This one, you'll go, why is that 200 milliseconds to download? Well, it turns out Livewire does something really weird. I found out. I didn't know this. It doesn't load this Livewire.js file from your file system, just saying like here the script tag, there's actually a specific route that it implants into your Laravel application to say when you ask for livewire.js, I actually want you to go to that route, call some PHP, load the file, and I don't know, does it do anything dynamic? I haven't dug into it. But it seems to just kind of get the JavaScript, the built JavaScript file, and load it through PHP, which I'm sure is fine, but that's a lot of work to do for just a JavaScript file, which we could just pluck out. It would be great if we could modify that. I would like, maybe I can talk to Caleb at some point and figure that out, whatever. But, yeah, for now, that runs through PHP, and that's kind of annoying. So that's a little bit slow. And obviously the other stuff is going to be through PHP. And so that makes that all a little bit slow. But does it work? Yeah. Let's go to this page. Oh, look, it just went straight to the page like that. Nothing to wait for at all, really. I mean, it was 100 milliseconds, but it felt instant, didn't it? And I'm not using any of there's no like SBA special stuff going on there. There's nothing weird that I'm doing. That's just native, like, this is the way that the browser works. I click a link, it takes me to that request, and it loads that HTML. And it's just really, really fast all by itself, which is cool. It's still slower than it would be with a web server, honestly. But it still feels really fast. I'm going to go back. We're going to do one of these updates from Livewire. So I need to do a better demo, but we've all seen the counter go up, right? That's just your Livewire updates working. Obviously, those go through PHP, so we get these. You can see it's sort of 100 milliseconds a time. With the web server, they'd be down around 50 or 60, which is, mostly like PHP's waiting, you've sent a request, it's gone through the web server, it's run the PHP code, now it's sent back the response. And this time it's doing it with, oh, PHP, I need a PHP, so cool, like, let's boot up PHP. Now let's run your code and do all that stuff. So it's a little bit slower, but as you can see, it still feels pretty instantaneous most of the time, which is really cool. So, and it works. This is it. These are all the fundamentals you've got working. You can send back HTML, and you can do JavaScript, and you can send back assets, and all of that, and it all works lovely. And so you can make a much prettier application than I've made. Right. That is it. Let's have a quick look at what's going on in the terminal here, so you can see some of if you've never experienced Tauri, there's some stuff that's going on here that's worth going through in a bit more detail. Because of the way that we're building the application, where Tauri is packaged up in our own composer package. It's not exposed directly to the root of your application. Right? I'm not installing Tauri in my native PHP Tauri demo Laravel app. No, it's already in the native PHP Tauri driver, and I'm pulling my app into that space and then letting Tauri do its thing. So we have to run it through the PHP artisan native serve command. That's what does all of the necessary steps to get that working, copying the files into the right place, blah, 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 blah. That is what means I can't make changes to my code here and have them refresh in the app live at the moment. We'll get that working at some point, but this code that's running here is a copy of the code that I'm writing in my editor, like when I'm in the actual application, the Laravel application that I'm working against. So until we've figured out like how to map those things together, the live updating is not going to happen. But we will figure, like that just feels completely possible to solve from my point of view. And yeah, so we run a bunch of PHP things, we do all this stuff, and then we start Tauri, right? So we set up the Tauri environment, and we have to manipulate some of the Tauri config at runtime. So we do that here, and that's all of this guff in the command line interface. And then we run Tauri proper. Well, that is this actually, it's all part of the same thing, but it runs afterwards, so it's got these bits happening afterwards, which then goes and installs crates, you know, all of the Rust things that are needed to make Tauri actually do its thing. Like, this is what Tauri would do if you were doing it by itself. And then on top of that, once we're in that environment, at this point in time, we're basically now in the world of Tauri's dev debug mode, where the terminal that you're running it from is tied to this application instance that's available here, you know, all of this stuff that makes up the application. And so if I quit this, it will stop this process. If I stop this process, it will close the app. And that is where we can get our runtime debugging output. And that's where some of the code that we've got in Rust, you'll see like these lines of print line and debug, or dbg, output some useful stuff for us. So that this doesn't even need to be here, really. I know what's going on because I can fathom it in my head, but it's useful. Sometimes it's really useful. Like, I can see, oh yeah, this request happened then, blah, 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 blah. You know, there's some stuff that will come out there that's going to make debugging and developing a little bit easier. And, you know, I've tried to get to a point, I had a go at it. I don't think it's working here, but like when there's an error from PHP, it would be actually really cool and useful to dump that out to the terminal without having to dump out the response from every single request and things like that. You know, just like, here's the useful stuff that comes from the PHP side when something goes wrong there. The only problems that I found with it is, as I was saying before, sometimes when something goes wrong in the PHP side, that causes the execution of the whole application to change in a way that Rust doesn't. Like, the Rust side, it's not Rust's fault, but the Rust side of the application doesn't handle very well yet, because I haven't built that sort of graceful management. So there could be, and I'm sure there will be, loads of edge cases where when you try and do something in your Laravel application as part of the web view, so like, you know, just click this button and it does something, and the response is weird from Rust's perspective, it's just going to crash. I don't know if I can demonstrate that actually here. I don't think I've got anything that tries to do anything weird, but yeah, it'll just crash and then everything will stop and you'll be like, and you'll see a crash alert and all sorts of things. Don't be alarmed by that. It's normal. There should be, I think what the point is, in the terminal, when that happens, you should get some useful output, and that's what we'll try and get to. And I think just coming from the web world and PHP space, and like, this isn't how we typically do things with a terminal running and seeing the output in the terminal. It might be unusual for some people to see that, and they don't know what they're looking for, and it'll just be a bit different and weird, because it'll also have a bunch of Rust nonsense around it that would be like, I don't care about, I'm just doing stuff in PHP. So just like some stuff to get used to there when you're doing things in Tauri. Okay, I've been yakking for nearly 2 hours. You know, my throat's really dry. I think I need to stop. And you've probably had enough. But there is one last thing that I want to talk about. We touched on it. We said we were going to come back to it. We did. And I'm gonna run through it now, and I want to try and make it as simple and straightforward as you can. This bit. If you are excited by any of this stuff that we're doing with native PHP, by all the work that we're putting into making this into like a really simple developer experience, to, you know, as we're saying, we want to build really robust native production ready applications. We're going to do that this year. That's the goal. To get there, I need your help. I need the support. It needs to be sponsorship, I'm afraid. If this is something that you think you can benefit from, sponsorship is going to help get this along the way. You know, I want to make it open source. I want it to be freely available to everybody. I want people to riff off of it and build other stuff and take PHP to the next level, whatever that is looking like. And this is the way to do it. Like, this feels like we can go to the next level from here, but we can only do that if I can get enough support for it. It's going to take me a really long time if I'm having to do it off my own back, because I've got to go and get the work. You know, I've got to go and do this and do that. You know, I'm looking to, if you want to build an app with this, like a production ready app, and you're prepared to kind of sponsor getting an app built this way, and at the same time having native PHP be constructed as part of that process, that would be great, honestly. If you know anybody who's maybe up for that, I would love to help do that. And that would be like the most direct way of getting this done, and I think that would be a win-win. Failing that, sponsorship is the way forward. And what I'm hoping to do here is make it worthwhile for people. Like, I'm not just out here with my palms open asking for money. I want it to be really beneficial. And there are a few things that I've got lined up for the native PHP community. So if you become a sponsor through this sponsor link, that you'll get those benefits, you know, Discord and some other things. But the key one for me right now is I'm not ready to make the Tauri driver openly available to everybody. It's still not, you know, we haven't looked at actually doing any functionality with what the browser is capable of. We've really just returned a web response to the browser. But there's so much more that native PHP can already do. And I need to build that stuff. And that stuff is coming. It needs to be there for V1. It's got to be built in Rust, basically. There's a whole load of Rust stuff that we've got to build. And I want people to come with me on the journey. I don't want to do it alone. But to do it, you know, I'd like some support. So if you're up for that, basically, if you can sponsor monthly any amount, it needs to be more than what it's going to cost to have you as a contributor on the repository, basically. So if you can contribute at least, I think it's $4. So maybe the minimum already is $5, but if you can do that every month, then I can add you to the repository as a contributor, and then you can get access to the Tauri driver early from everybody else. That's my little surprise for today. Obviously, it's not really ready to go, so you'll just be getting early access and toying around with stuff and maybe helping me fix some things and add some things. But there's, a whole bunch of things to come. I've got to do loads of documentation and lots of other things. There's lots of work still. So any and all support that you can give, I'd be most grateful for. If you really want to get in early and help support this project on the Tauri side and get us moving towards production, please, 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 please consider supporting me through that. That will really, really help. I'm not going to talk about sponsorship more. I might mention it occasionally just as a reminder, but I feel really uncomfortable talking about it, honestly. And I know that everybody's here for this free thing. They want it to be working, and they want it to be great, and they also want it to be free. All I'm asking is that, you know, it just takes a few people to make that happen, if you can. And yeah, as I said before, if you know anybody who wants an application built and they're prepared to kind of give it a go with native PHP and we get it to production together, that would be amazing. I'll definitely figure out ways to make that worth the while for them. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. It's been 2 hours. We've been through this. Have you got any questions? You got anything else that you want to talk about? I feel like it's been a lot. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. transition back to this. Yeah, I'll leave it for a second just to see if there's any chat that comes through, but if there's nothing, I'm going to bid you all farewell and have a great weekend, the usual sign-off. We're going to come back to this next week. Yeah, we're going to carry on. We're going to be building. Obviously, I can't make these kinds of announcements and things every week, so we're just going to crack on with the fixing up the other stuff, making things work together, getting PHP to call the Rust side of things, and start moving this towards production. Come and join me. Right. Thanks for your time. It's been lovely. Goodbye.